The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the ballroom. Every head turned toward me, and I felt the familiar burn of embarrassment creep up my neck. But this time, it wasn't just about a clumsy mistake. It was about the dress I was wearing. The $30 clearance rack find that had just changed everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 weeks before my cousin Madison's wedding, I was staring at my bank account with the same expression someone might reserve for a terminal diagnosis. The numbers didn't lie. $127.43. After rent, groceries, and my student loan payment, that was all I had left for the entire month. And somehow, I needed to find something appropriate to wear to what Madison had described as, quote, the social event of the decade. My cousin had always been the golden child of our family. While I was working 2 part-time jobs to put myself through community college, Madison was jet-setting across Europe with her trust fund and Instagram-perfect lifestyle. When her engagement to tech mogul Harrison Blackwood made the society pages, I knew this wedding would be far beyond anything I could afford to attend properly. The invitation itself should have been a warning. Heavy cardstock with gold embossing, requesting the honor of your presence at the Grandview Country Club, a venue I'd only heard about in whispered conversations about old money and exclusivity. The dress code was listed as black tie optional, which I'd learned was wealthy people speak for dress expensively or don't come at all. I spent hours scrolling through department store websites, watching my dreams deflate with each price tag. The cheapest formal dresses started at $200, and that was before taxes and shipping. Designer options ran into the thousands. I considered skipping the wedding entirely, crafting some excuse about work or illness, but Madison had specifically asked me to be there. Despite our different circumstances, we'd grown up together, shared secrets, and maintained a bond that transcended our family's financial disparities. That's when I found myself in the forgotten corner of Discount Palace, a warehouse store on the outskirts of town where clothing went to die. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in an unflattering yellow glow. Most shoppers avoided the formal wear section entirely, a graveyard of prom dresses from previous decades, and bridesmaid gowns in colors that had never been fashionable. But there, hanging between a lime green monstrosity and a sequined nightmare, was a simple black dress. The fabric felt substantial in my hands, not the flimsy material I expected from a discount store. It had clean lines, a flattering silhouette, and when I held it up to myself in the cloudy mirror, it actually looked decent. The price tag made my heart skip, $29.99, marked down from an original price of $400. I examined every seam, every button, looking for the fatal flaw that would explain the dramatic price reduction. There was a tiny snag near the hem, barely noticeable, and a missing size tag. Otherwise, it seemed perfect. Too perfect. I'd learned that things this good were usually too good to be true, but with my bank account hovering near zero and the wedding approaching fast, I couldn't afford to be picky. The checkout clerk, a tired-looking woman with silver hair, scanned the dress twice before shrugging. Sometimes returns come back without proper tags, she explained. Lucky you. Lucky me indeed. I walked out of that store with the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks, clutching my bargain find like a lottery ticket. At home, I tried the dress on properly for the first time. My tiny studio apartment didn't have a full-length mirror, so I had to piece together my reflection using the bathroom mirror and a compact. The dress fit perfectly, hugging my curves in all the right places while remaining tasteful and elegant. I paired it with my only decent heels and my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one valuable thing I owned. Standing there in my makeshift mirror setup, I felt transformed. Not into someone wealthy or privileged, but into someone who belonged. Someone who could walk into that country club with confidence, who could celebrate her cousin's happiness without feeling like an outsider looking in. The morning of the wedding, I spent extra time on my hair and makeup, using YouTube tutorials to create an updo that looked more expensive than it was. I'd saved enough for a rideshare to the venue, knowing my beat-up Honda Civic wouldn't exactly fit the aesthetic of the country club's valet parking. As we pulled up to the Grandview Country Club, my confidence began to waver. The building looked like something out of a movie, all stone columns and perfectly manicured gardens. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, and guests in designer attire glided up the front steps like they owned the world. My $30 dress suddenly felt less like a miracle find and more like a cheap costume. But I'd come this far. I paid the driver, smoothed down my dress, and walked through those imposing front doors with as much dignity as I could muster. The cocktail hour was already in full swing when I arrived. The ballroom was a vision of white flowers and crystal chandeliers, with guests clustered in small groups, champagne glasses glinting in the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. I recognized some faces from family gatherings over the years, but most of the crowd was unfamiliar. Madison's new social circle, I assumed. I made my way to the bar, ordered a glass of champagne to calm my nerves, and tried to blend into the background. That's when I heard the first whisper. "Who is that girl in the obvious knockoff?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned slightly, pretending to admire the floral arrangements while straining to hear more. "The dress is trying so hard to look designer, but you can tell it's cheap," another voice added. "The fabric, the cut, it's clearly a poor imitation." My face burned with shame. I wanted to disappear, to find the nearest exit and flee back to my small apartment where I could hide from this humiliation. But before I could move, I heard Madison's laugh across the room, bright and joyful, the sound of someone living the happiest day of their life. I couldn't leave, not yet. So I stayed, sipping my champagne and trying to ignore the growing number of glances and whispered comments that seemed to follow me around the room. Each word felt like a needle, pricking at the confidence I'd tried so hard to build. The ceremony itself provided a temporary refuge from the judgment I felt radiating from the other guests. Seated in the back row, I watched Madison walk down the aisle in her custom Vera Wang gown, a creation that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. She looked radiant, every inch the fairy tale bride, and for a moment I forgot about my own discomfort and simply felt happy for her. Harrison waited at the altar, his face lighting up as he saw his bride. Their love was genuine, obvious to everyone in the room, and it reminded me why I'd wanted to be here despite everything. This wasn't about social status or expensive clothes. It was about family, about celebrating two people who had found each other. But the moment of peace didn't last long. As the ceremony concluded and guests began filtering back toward the cocktail area for the reception, the whispers resumed with renewed intensity. "I heard she's the poor cousin Madison felt obligated to invite," someone said behind me as I stood to leave my pew. "Well, she certainly looks the part. That dress is probably from Target or worse." I kept walking, my heels clicking against the marble floor, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. The reception area had been transformed while we were in the ceremony. Round tables draped in ivory linen filled the space, each centerpiece a masterpiece of white roses and baby's breath. The head table gleamed with crystal and silverware that caught the light from the chandeliers above. Finding my assigned seat took longer than expected. Table assignments were displayed on an elegant easel near the entrance, written in calligraphy that looked more like art than penmanship. I ran my finger down the list. Emily Chen, table 12. Of course. The table furthest from the head table, tucked away near the kitchen doors where the sound of clinking dishes would compete with the speeches. My table mates were a mix of distant relatives and +1s who clearly didn't know each other. We made polite small talk during the salad course, the kind of surface-level conversation that happens when strangers are thrust together at formal events. I learned about careers in accounting and real estate, vacation plans to the Bahamas, and children's achievements in prep schools I'd never heard of. "Your dress is lovely," said Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman seated to my left. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her comment felt genuine rather than the backhanded compliments I'd been receiving all day. "Thank you," I replied, grateful for the first positive words I'd heard about my appearance. "The cut is so classic. Reminds me of pieces I used to see in the fashion houses in Paris back in my modeling days." Before I could respond, a sharp laugh erupted from the table next to us. 3 women, all in their 30s and dripping with jewelry, had been watching our conversation. "Modeling days," one of them repeated mockingly. "How sweet. Though I think your eye for fashion might need updating. That dress screams discount store." The second woman leaned forward conspiratorially. I was in fashion retail for years. You can always tell the knockoffs. The stitching, the fabric quality, the way it hangs. This one hits all the red flags. It's actually insulting to the designer being copied, the third added. Whoever made the original dress put thought and craftsmanship into it, and then some factory churns out cheap imitations for people who want to pretend they can afford the real thing. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed with anger. "That's quite enough," she said firmly, but the women had already turned away, satisfied with their public humiliation of me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed some air. The truth was, I needed to escape before I started crying in front of everyone. The ladies' room became my sanctuary, a marble and gold refuge where I could finally let my composure crack. Staring at myself in the ornate mirror, I saw what they saw, a girl trying too hard to fit in somewhere she didn't belong. The dress that had made me feel confident in my apartment now seemed like a costume, a pathetic attempt to play dress-up in a world that would never accept me. I splashed cold water on my wrists, an old trick my mother had taught me for staying calm, and gave myself a stern talking to in the mirror. I would get through the reception, congratulate Madison properly, and then disappear back to my real life. These people's opinions didn't matter. Their approval wasn't something I needed or wanted. But when I returned to the reception, things had somehow gotten worse. Word had apparently spread about the girl in the fake designer dress, and I could feel eyes following me as I made my way back to my table. Conversations paused as I passed, then resumed in hushed tones once I was out of earshot. The worst part was seeing Madison's friends from college, women I'd met briefly at family gatherings over the years. Sarah Hendricks, who'd always been polite during our previous encounters, was now whispering animatedly to her husband while shooting glances in my direction. Jessica Webb, who'd once complimented my homemade cookies at a Christmas party, was now part of a cluster of women who seemed to be having an in-depth discussion about fashion authenticity. During the father of the bride's speech, I watched Madison's face glow with happiness as her father talked about watching his little girl grow into a successful woman. He spoke about her achievements, her character, her bright future with Harrison. The love in the room was palpable, and I felt a stab of loneliness, knowing that I was experiencing this beautiful moment as an outsider, marked by my cheap dress, as someone who didn't truly belong. The speeches continued with Harrison's best man sharing stories of their college friendship, their business ventures, their shared dreams of success. Each story highlighted a world I'd never been part of: private schools, family connections, opportunities that opened doors before you even knew you wanted to walk through them. When the dancing began, I remained seated at my relegated table, watching couples sweep across the polished floor. The band played classic standards, the kind of timeless songs that made everything feel like a movie. Madison and Harrison's first dance was picture perfect, her train arranged carefully around them as they moved together in practiced steps that spoke of professional dance lessons. Other couples joined them gradually: Harrison's parents, Madison's parents, the wedding party with their partners. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine, all coordinated elegance and expensive fabrics that moved beautifully under the ballroom lights. "Not dancing?" asked a voice behind me. I turned to find James Mitchell, Harrison's younger brother, holding 2 champagne glasses. He'd been friendly during the cocktail hour, one of the few people who'd treated me normally. "I'm enjoying watching," I replied, accepting the champagne gratefully. "The dress police have been giving you trouble?" he asked with a knowing smile. I nearly choked on my champagne. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been the target themselves," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "Trust me, this crowd can smell new money, or no money, from across a ballroom. They've been sharpening their claws on outsiders for generations." His honesty was refreshing, even if it confirmed my worst fears about how I was being perceived. James and I continued talking as the reception reached its peak energy. The dance floor filled with guests spinning to upbeat jazz numbers, their laughter mixing with the music in a symphony of celebration. Despite his warning about the crowd, James himself seemed different from the others, more grounded, less concerned with appearances. "So what's your story?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Madison mentioned you're in school?" Community college, I admitted, waiting for the subtle shift in his expression that usually followed that revelation. It didn't come. Business administration. I'm hoping to transfer to a 4-year university next year if I can get the finances figured out. That's ambitious. Working while studying? 2 jobs, actually. I waitress at Romano's downtown, and I do data entry for a small accounting firm on weekends. I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't expected. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Romano's has the best tiramisu in the city, James said with enthusiasm. I'm impressed you can balance all that. I barely managed to pass my business classes at Yale, and I didn't have to work. His casual mention of Yale should have intimidated me, but the way he said it, almost apologetically, made it clear he understood the privilege it represented. Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught our attention. The ballroom doors had opened to admit a latecomer, and the energy in the room shifted palpably. Conversations paused mid-sentence as heads turned toward the entrance. Even the band seemed to sense the change, their playing becoming more subdued. The woman who entered was striking in an understated way. Probably in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and wearing a simple but obviously expensive navy dress. She moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, stopping to greet various guests with warm embraces and air kisses. "Who is that?" I whispered to James. His eyebrows raised in surprise. "You don't recognize her? That's Vivienne Laurent." The name meant nothing to me, and my confusion must have shown on my face. "The fashion designer," James explained. "She's practically fashion royalty. Madison's been trying to get her to attend for months. They met through some charity work Madison does. I'm surprised she actually came." Fashion designer. My stomach dropped as I watched Vivienne work her way through the crowd, greeting people with the ease of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. If she was truly as prominent as James suggested, she would certainly recognize a knockoff when she saw one. I started to excuse myself from the table, planning another strategic retreat to the ladies' room, but James caught my arm gently. "Where are you going?" "The party's just getting interesting." "I just need some air," I said weakly, but he was already standing, extending his hand. "Come on, let me introduce you to Vivienne. She loves meeting new people, especially young women starting their careers." The panic that filled my chest was overwhelming. Meeting a renowned fashion designer while wearing what everyone had identified as a cheap knockoff felt like walking into traffic blindfolded. But James was already guiding me through the crowd, his hand on my elbow, and backing out now would only draw more attention. As we approached Vivienne, she was deep in conversation with Madison and Harrison, her hands gesturing expressively as she spoke. Up close, I could see the quality that set her apart. Not just her clothes, which were clearly expensive, but something in her bearing that spoke of creativity and confidence. "Vivienne," James interrupted politely, "I'd love you to meet Emily Chen. Emily, this is Vivienne Laurent." Vivienne turned toward me with a polite smile that quickly transformed into something else entirely. Her eyes widened, then narrowed as she studied my dress with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle. The conversation around us continued, but I felt frozen under her scrutiny. "Excuse me," she said suddenly, her French accent becoming more pronounced. "Where did you find this dress?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone within earshot had stopped talking, sensing drama about to unfold. This was it, the moment of ultimate humiliation. A world-renowned designer was about to publicly expose me as a fraud, wearing a pathetic imitation of real fashion. I got it at a discount store," I stammered, my face burning with shame. "I know it's not real designer. I just needed something appropriate for the wedding." Vivienne stepped closer, her fingers reaching out to touch the fabric of my dress. "May I?" she asked, and I nodded numbly, too mortified to resist. She examined the dress with the focused attention of a scientist studying a specimen. Her fingers traced the seams, tested the weight of the fabric, studied the way it draped. The silence stretched on forever, punctuated only by the distant sound of the band playing and the whispered conversations of guests trying to understand what was happening. "The construction," Vivienne murmured, almost to herself. "The fabric weight, the way the bias cut falls. She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You said you found this at a discount store?" "Yes," I whispered, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow me whole. "Which store?" "Discount Palace, on Riverside Avenue." The words came out barely audible. Vivienne's expression changed completely. The analytical intensity disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. She took a step back, her hand pressed to her chest. "Mon Dieu," she breathed. "This is impossible." The crowd around us had grown larger, drawn by the unfolding drama. I could see the fashion retail expert from earlier pushing forward, probably eager to witness the professional takedown of my fake dress. Madison looked concerned, clearly worried that her wedding reception was being overshadowed by whatever scene was playing out. "What's impossible?" Harrison asked, voicing the question everyone was thinking. Vivienne looked around at the gathered faces, then back at me. "This dress," she said slowly, "is not a knockoff. This is from my private collection, my spring 2019 line that was never released to the public." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the world tilt sideways as her words sank in. Not a knockoff. Her collection, never released. "But that's impossible," the fashion retail woman sputtered. "I know fake designer pieces when I see them. The price alone." "Price means nothing," Vivienne cut her off with elegant authority. "This piece was created in my atelier in Paris. See this stitching here?" She pointed to a detail on the dress that I'd never noticed. "This is my signature technique. It cannot be replicated by mass production." She turned back to me, her expression now filled with curiosity rather than suspicion. "How did you come to own this dress?" These pieces were supposed to be destroyed after the collection was canceled. I felt like I was in a dream, or perhaps having some kind of breakdown. "I found it on a clearance rack," I managed to say. "It was marked down to $30. There was no designer tag, just a price tag." $30, Vivienne repeated, and suddenly she began to laugh, not mockingly but with genuine delight, for a dress that cost $8,000 to create. $8,000, the number hit me like a physical blow. I had been wearing an $8,000 dress, casually, to a wedding, after buying it for less than the cost of a decent dinner. The crowd around us erupted in murmurs of disbelief and excitement. The same people who had been whispering about my obvious knockoff were now staring at me with a mixture of amazement and envy. But Vivienne wasn't finished. She was studying me now with the same intensity she'd given the dress, as if trying to solve another puzzle. "You have excellent instincts," she said finally. "In a store full of mass-produced fashion, you recognized quality. You saw past the missing labels and trust your eye." She paused, smiling. "That is a rare gift." The transformation in the room was instantaneous and almost surreal. The same people who had spent the evening dissecting my appearance with cruel precision were now looking at me as if I'd been touched by magic. The fashion retail expert who had loudly proclaimed my dress a cheap imitation was now studying me from across the crowd with undisguised fascination. "But how did one of your pieces end up in a discount store?" Madison asked, voicing what everyone was wondering. Vivienne shook her head slowly, still examining the dress with professional admiration. "This collection was my most experimental work. I poured 2 years of my life into 12 pieces, exploring sustainable fabrics and revolutionary construction techniques. But my business partners felt it was too risky, too avant-garde for the commercial market." Her voice carried a trace of old disappointment. "They convinced me to shelve the entire line." She gestured to the dress I was wearing. "These pieces were supposed to be archived in climate-controlled storage, preserved as part of my design legacy. Only my closest associates knew they existed." Her brow furrowed in concentration. 3 years ago, I had to liquidate one of my storage facilities due to a lease dispute. I trusted my assistant to handle the transfer properly." "Your assistant sold them?" Harrison asked. "Not intentionally, I believe. Isabel was overwhelmed managing multiple storage units, multiple collections spanning decades. She was supposed to catalog everything and move it to our new facility." Vivienne's expression grew thoughtful. "But some items were misplaced in the chaos. I assumed they had been lost or damaged during the move." James leaned forward, captivated by the story. "So they ended up in the general liquidation of the storage unit?" It appears so. Storage companies auction off abandoned contents when leases go unpaid. The buyers often have no idea what they're purchasing. They simply sort through items and send everything to various retailers. Vivienne looked at me with something approaching reverence. This dress has been on quite a journey before finding its way to you. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been mortified about wearing a fake designer dress, I'd actually been wearing something far more exclusive than anything anyone else in the room owned. The whispers around us had shifted completely in tone. No longer mocking, but awed. Mrs. Patterson, who had defended my dress earlier, pushed through the crowd with a triumphant smile. "I told you it reminded me of the fashion houses in Paris," she declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Quality recognizes quality." But it was Vivienne's next words that truly changed everything. "You know," she said, studying my face intently, "I have been looking for someone with your eye for design, someone who can see past labels and recognize true craftsmanship." She paused, seeming to make a decision. "Are you familiar with my internship program for emerging talent?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Each year, I select 5 young people to work directly with my design team in New York. They learn every aspect of the business: design, construction, marketing, retail strategy. It's highly competitive. This year alone, we received over 3,000 applications. The crowd around us grew completely silent. Even the band seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their music fading to a gentle background hum. "What's your field of study?" Vivienne asked. "Business administration," I managed to whisper. "Perfect. Fashion is art, but it's also commerce. Understanding both sides is essential for success in this industry." She reached into her purse and withdrew an elegant business card. "I want you to call my office Monday morning. Ask for Catherine Mills, my program coordinator. Tell her Vivienne Laurent personally recommended you for our summer intensive program." I stared at the card in my trembling hands. Vivienne Laurent's personal business card, pressed into my palm like a golden ticket to a life I'd never dared to dream about. "The program includes full room and board in New York, a monthly stipend, and direct mentorship from my senior designers," she continued. "If you excel, there's potential for a permanent position with our company after graduation." The same women who had spent the evening criticizing my dress were now watching with barely concealed envy. Sarah Hendricks, who had whispered about my obvious knockoff earlier, was staring at the business card in my hands as if it were made of pure diamond. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible. "Why me? I don't have any fashion experience. I'm just a waitress taking business classes." Vivienne smiled warmly. "Experience can be taught, natural instinct cannot." In a room full of people wearing designer labels because they're expensive, you chose quality because you recognized it. That intuition is invaluable in fashion. She stepped closer, her voice becoming more intimate despite the crowd of listeners. "I started with nothing, you know. My first job was cleaning offices in Paris, while I sketched designs in my spare time. I saved every franc to buy fabric scraps from the fashion houses, teaching myself to sew by candlelight in my tiny apartment." The parallel wasn't lost on anyone present. Here was one of the world's most successful fashion designers, sharing her origin story with a girl in a $30 dress who had just been offered the opportunity of a lifetime. The interview that followed was unlike anything I had expected. Instead of grilling me about fashion history or design principles, they asked about my experiences balancing work and school, managing tight budgets, and finding creative solutions to practical problems. "Tell us about a time you had to make a difficult decision with limited resources," Catherine requested. I found myself describing the choice to spend my last $30 on the dress, knowing I wouldn't have money for groceries until my next paycheck. "I could have stayed home and saved the money," I explained. "But sometimes investing in yourself requires accepting short-term sacrifice for long-term opportunities." Vivienne leaned forward with interest. "And how did you evaluate the dress's quality when you found it?" "The fabric felt substantial, heavier than you'd expect from a discount store.
The seams were finished properly, not just serged edges like mass-produced clothing. The cut was architectural rather than trendy, which suggested it was designed to last rather than follow temporary fashion. I paused, remembering that moment in the store. But honestly, it was also intuitive. It just felt different from everything else on the rack. That intuition, Vivian said, is what we call the eye. It can't be taught in school or learned from textbooks. You either have it or you don't. The conversation shifted to my career goals and how the internship might fit into my larger plans. I talked about wanting to understand fashion as a business, about being interested in sustainable practices and ethical manufacturing, about seeing fashion as a way to help people express their authentic selves, rather than conform to arbitrary standards. Most applicants want to be designers, Catherine noted. You seem more interested in the business strategy side. Design is crucial, I replied, but even the most beautiful clothes are meaningless if they can't reach the people who need them. I want to understand how to make quality fashion accessible, how to build sustainable business models that don't exploit workers or damage the environment. Vivian and Catherine exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from my living situation to my comfort level with the demanding pace of the New York fashion industry. As the call was winding down, Vivian asked one final question. What would you do if we offered you this position, but your family or friends discouraged you from taking such a big risk? The answer came immediately. I'd thank them for caring about me, but I'd take the position anyway. People who haven't taken risks themselves often project their fears onto others. I've learned to trust my own judgment, even when it goes against conventional wisdom. Friday morning, my phone rang while I was getting ready for my shift at Romano's. Catherine's name appeared on the screen, and my heart started pounding before I even answered. Emily, I'm calling with good news. We'd like to offer you a position in our summer intensive program. The relief and excitement hit me like a physical force. I had to sit down on my bed to keep from collapsing. The program begins June 1st. We'll arrange your transportation to New York and help you settle into the company housing. Miss Laurent specifically requested that you be assigned to work directly with our business development team during your rotation. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment for several minutes trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. In the span of a week, I'd gone from being a struggling community college student to someone with a pathway into one of the fashion's most exclusive worlds. The girl who'd been mocked for her $30 dress was about to become an intern at Laurent Design Studios. Sometimes I realized the most important journeys begin with a single step taken in the right direction, even when you're not sure where the path leads. The 6 weeks between accepting the internship and moving to New York passed in a whirlwind of preparation and surreal moments of recognition. Word had somehow spread through my small circle about the opportunity, creating ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. At Romano's, my coworkers treated me like a minor celebrity. Tony, the head chef who rarely spoke to servers, started asking my opinion on the presentation of desserts. "You got the fashion eye now," he'd say with a grin. "Tell me if this tiramisu looks sophisticated enough." But the most unexpected reaction came from my family. My mother, who had always worried about my impractical dreams of transferring to a 4-year university, suddenly became my biggest advocate. She called my aunt in California to brag about her daughter's internship with a famous French designer. The pride in her voice when she told the story was worth more than any salary. My cousin Madison reached out a week after the wedding, still glowing from her honeymoon in Santorini. "I keep thinking about what happened at the reception," she said during our coffee date. "I invited you because you're family, but I had no idea I was giving you the introduction that would change your life." "I couldn't have known," I assured her, though I wondered what would have happened if I'd skipped the wedding entirely. "The crazy part is," she said, "Vivian told me she almost didn't come. She was exhausted from Fashion Week and only decided to show up because she felt guilty about canceling last minute." Madison shook her head in amazement. "It's like everything had to align perfectly for this to happen." 2 weeks before my departure, an unexpected package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a leather portfolio embossed with the Laurent Design Studios logo, along with a handwritten note from Vivian. Emily, a proper designer always arrives prepared. Use this to document your journey. VL. The portfolio contained high-quality sketch paper, professional drawing pencils, and fabric swatches from Laurent's current collections. It was the most expensive gift I'd ever received, and holding it made the internship feel finally, completely real. My last day at Romano's was bittersweet. Maria presented me with a cookbook signed by the entire staff, and Tony surprised me with a container of his grandmother's sauce recipe. For when you're too fancy to come back here, he joked, though his eyes were serious. I'll never be too fancy for Romano's, I promised, and meant it. The accounting firm threw a small farewell party in their conference room, complete with a cake that read, "Good luck in fashion," in spreadsheet-style font. Mr. Peterson pulled me aside afterwards with advice that proved more valuable than I realized at the time. Business is business, whether you're selling clothes or managing portfolios, he said seriously. Don't let the glamour distract you from the fundamentals. Profit margins, inventory management, customer acquisition costs, these things matter in fashion just like everywhere else. He handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a professional calculator, the same model he used for complex financial analysis. Every successful business person needs reliable tools, he explained with a slight smile. The night before leaving for New York, I packed my single suitcase with a mixture of excitement and terror. Everything I owned fit into one bag, which felt pathetic until I remembered that Vivian had started with even less. I carefully folded the $30 dress that had started everything, placing it between layers of tissue paper like a precious artifact. The train ride to New York was my first time leaving my home state. As familiar landscapes gave way to unknown territories, I felt the physical sensation of my old life disappearing behind me. By the time the Manhattan skyline appeared through the window, I was someone else entirely. Not the struggling student from a small city, but an intern at one of the world's most prestigious fashion houses. Catherine Mills met me at Penn Station, easily recognizable in her crisp blazer and confident stride. "Welcome to New York," she said warmly, taking my suitcase despite my protests. "Ready for the adventure to begin?" The company housing was a converted brownstone in the garment district, shared by interns from various fashion companies. My roommate was Sophia Martinez, a Parsons student interning at a sustainable fashion startup. She greeted me with enthusiasm that immediately put me at ease.
The girl who had walked into that wedding feeling ashamed and out of place was gone. In her place was someone who had learned that sometimes the most valuable discoveries happen when we stop trying to fit in and start trusting our own judgment. Monday morning arrived with the weight of possibility hanging over everything. I sat in my tiny studio apartment, staring at Vivian Laurent's business card as if it might disappear if I looked away. The events of Saturday night felt like a fever dream. Surely I hadn't really been offered an internship with one of the world's most prestigious fashion houses while wearing a dress I'd bought for $30. But the card was real, heavy cardstock with elegant letterpress printing that spoke of serious money and authentic prestige. At exactly 9 o'clock, I dialed the number with trembling fingers. "Hello, this is Emily Chen. Vivian Laurent told me to call about an internship program. She mentioned that she personally recommended me." There was a pause, followed by the sound of papers rustling. "Emily Chen," Catherine repeated slowly. "Yes, I have a note here. Miss Laurent called me personally yesterday to add your name to our priority list. That's unusual." "Unusual how?" "In 15 years of managing this program, I've never seen her make a last-minute addition, especially not based on a chance meeting. You must have made quite an impression." Over the next 30 minutes, Catherine walked me through the program details. The summer intensive ran for 12 weeks, starting in just 6 weeks. Participants lived in a company-sponsored apartment building in Manhattan's garment district, worked directly with Vivian's design team, and rotated through every department of the business, from sketching initial concepts to overseeing production to managing retail relationships.
The competition is fierce, Catherine warned. We typically select participants from fashion schools like Parsons, FIT, or RISD. Most applicants have portfolios, internship experience, industry connections. She paused meaningfully. You mentioned you're studying business administration at community college? Yes, I said, waiting for her to explain why that disqualified me. Interesting. Miss Laurent specifically noted that your business background could bring a fresh perspective to the program. She's been pushing our team to think more strategically about market positioning and brand sustainability. Catherine explained the application process, a formal interview via video call, a written essay about my career goals, and a creative project demonstrating my understanding of fashion as both art and commerce. Given the timeline and Ms. Laurent's personal interest in your candidacy, we can expedite your application. Could you manage a video interview this Thursday? Thursday. 3 days to prepare for the most important conversation of my life. I agreed immediately, then spent the next hour in a panic-induced research session about Lauren Design Studios, fashion industry trends, and anything else that might help me sound like I belonged in their world. The hardest part was explaining the situation to my bosses. At Romano's, Maria, the manager, was skeptical but supportive. Fashion in New York? That's a big change from serving tiramisu to tourists. But if it's what you want, go for it. At the accounting firm, Mr. Peterson was more pragmatic. He said, business skills transfer everywhere. Fashion houses are still businesses. They need people who understand profit margins and operational efficiency. He paused, studying me over his reading glasses. Just remember that glamorous industries often hide very unglamorous realities. Thursday arrived with unexpected snow, coating the city in a layer of white that felt symbolic somehow. A clean slate, a fresh beginning. I'd set up my laptop in the corner of my apartment with the best lighting, arranged my grandmother's pearls and the few business textbooks I owned in the background to create an impression of competence. At exactly 2 o'clock, my laptop chimed with an incoming video call. Catherine Mills appeared on screen first, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes behind designer glasses. She was sitting in what appeared to be a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Emily, good to meet you face to face. I have someone here who insisted on joining our conversation. The camera angle shifted, and suddenly, Vivian Laurent was on screen beside Catherine. She looked exactly as elegant as she had at the wedding, but somehow more approachable in the casual environment of her office.
"You're the girl with the amazing discovery story," she exclaimed, helping me unpack. "Everyone in the program has heard about how Vivian found you. It's like something out of a movie." Sophia's casual mention of my story being common knowledge among the interns was both thrilling and intimidating. I'd gone from complete anonymity to minor fashion legend status based on a single evening. Monday morning arrived with typical New York energy. Sirens, construction noise, and the constant hum of a city that never fully sleeps. The Laurent Design Studios occupied 3 floors of a glass building in Midtown with views of the Hudson River and the kind of modern aesthetics that screamed success. The other interns gathered in the main conference room for orientation were exactly what I had expected. Impeccably dressed, confidently networked, and casually mentioning their previous internships at major fashion magazines or luxury brands. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with being the obvious outsider. But when Vivian entered the room, her eyes immediately found mine across the crowded space. She smiled and nodded, a small gesture that somehow made me feel like I belonged there as much as anyone else. "Welcome to Laurent Design Studios," she began, her voice carrying the authority that commanded instant attention. "You are here because each of you possesses something special. Vision, creativity, business acumen, or simply the ability to see what others miss." She walked around the conference table as she spoke, making eye contact with each intern. "This industry will try to convince you that success depends on connections, inherited wealth, or attending the right schools. I'm here to tell you that is nonsense. Success depends on talent, perseverance, and the courage to trust your instincts even when everyone else thinks you're wrong." When she reached my chair, she paused slightly.
Some of you have traditional fashion backgrounds. Others bring different perspectives that will challenge our assumptions and push us to innovate. Both are equally valuable. The orientation continued with department heads explaining their roles in the company's ecosystem. I learned about the design process from initial concept sketches to final production. The business development team, where I would spend my first rotation, handled everything from market research to retail partnerships to brand positioning. Marcus Chen, the business development director, was a Harvard MBA who'd left management consulting to apply analytical thinking to fashion strategy. He said, "We're not just selling clothes. We're selling identity, aspiration, and the promise that what you wear can transform how you feel about yourself." His words resonated deeply with my experience. The $30 dress hadn't just been clothing, it had been a gateway to possibilities I'd never imagined. That evening, I called my mother from the tiny balcony of my shared apartment, watching the sunset over Manhattan's endless grid of lights. "How was the first day?" she asked. "Overwhelming, exciting, terrifying, and perfect," I said honestly. "I think I might actually be good at this." "Of course you are," she replied with the confidence that only mothers possess. "You've been finding diamonds in discount stores your whole life. Now you just get to do it professionally." 3 months into the internship, I stood in Vivian's private office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, holding a presentation folder that represented everything I'd learned about turning fashion dreams into sustainable business reality. The summer program was ending in 2 weeks, and this meeting would determine whether my fairy tale had a permanent happy ending or would fade into a beautiful memory. The project I'd spent the last month developing was ambitious, a comprehensive business plan for launching emerging designers through Laurent's platform while maintaining ethical production standards and accessible price points. It was the kind of initiative that could revolutionize how luxury fashion approached the market or crash spectacularly if the economics didn't work.
Your analysis of the mid-market opportunity is fascinating, Vivian said, flipping through my research on consumer willingness to pay premium prices for ethically produced fashion. But tell me about implementation. How do we maintain our brand prestige while expanding accessibility? I'd anticipated this question and had spent weeks developing an answer that balanced idealism with practical business strategy. We create a separate line under the Laurent umbrella. Same design principles and quality standards, but using more cost-effective materials and streamlined production processes. Think of it as Laurent's younger sister brand. And the target demographic? Young professionals who understand quality but are still building their careers and budgets. People like... I paused, realizing I was about to use myself as a case study. People like I was 6 months ago. They want to invest in pieces that will last, but they can't afford $8,000 dresses. Vivian smiled at my honesty. Go on. The key is positioning. We're not selling discount designer clothes, we're selling entry-level luxury, a gateway for customers to build relationships with the Laurent brand that will evolve as their purchasing power increases. I opened to a page showing projected customer lifetime value calculations. The initial profit margins are lower, but the long-term brand loyalty and market expansion potential are significant. Marcus Chen, who had been mentoring me throughout the business development rotation, leaned forward with interest. "You've identified a genuine market gap," he said approvingly. "Luxury brands often ignore the aspirational customer segment, but those consumers represent enormous untapped potential." Over the next hour, we dissected every aspect of the proposal. Vivian challenged my assumptions about production costs, questioned my marketing strategy, and pushed me to defend every financial projection. It was intellectually exhausting and absolutely exhilarating. "There's one element missing from your presentation," Vivian said, closing the folder, and studying me with that penetrating gaze I'd come to recognize as her serious consideration mode. My heart sank. After weeks of preparation, what crucial component had I overlooked? "You haven't addressed the most important question. Would you be willing to lead this initiative?" The words hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation rolled into one.
Lead it? As a full-time position after you complete your degree. We would structure it as a 2-year program. Finish your bachelor's degree while working part-time to develop the brand launch, then transition to full-time management upon graduation. I felt the same disorientation I'd experienced at Madison's wedding when Vivian first recognized my dress. The girl who had worried about affording a wedding outfit was being offered the opportunity to launch her own fashion line under one of the industry's most respected names. "I don't have any management experience," I said weakly. "You have something more valuable, authentic understanding of the target customer, because you are the target customer. Market research can tell us what people say they want, but you know what people actually need." Vivian stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She turned back to face me with that penetrating gaze I'd come to recognize as her serious consideration mode. "When I started my first collection, everyone told me I was too young, too inexperienced, too foreign to succeed in American fashion. The established designers saw me as a threat to their comfortable market position. You remind me of myself at that age, hungry, intuitive, unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom. Those qualities matter more than any MBA or fashion degree." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering salary expectations, educational support, and the timeline for launching what we tentatively called Laurent Accessible. By the time I left Vivian's office, I was holding a formal job offer that would change my life trajectory permanently. That evening, I called home to share the news. My mother cried with joy, my father asked detailed questions about the benefits package, and my younger brother demanded to know if I could get him discounts on cool clothes. Their reactions grounded me in the reality of how far I'd traveled from that night when $30 represented my entire fashion budget. Madison called later that week, having heard about my job offer through the family network. "I keep thinking about the reception," she said with amazement in her voice. "If someone had told me that my wedding would launch my cousin's fashion career, I would have thought they were crazy." "Your wedding didn't launch my career," I corrected her gently. "Your wedding gave me the platform to launch my own career. There's a difference." The distinction mattered to me. While the encounter with Vivian had opened doors, everything that followed, the successful interview, the internship performance, the business proposal, had been earned through my own efforts and decisions.
The final week of the internship program included presentations from all the participants. My fellow interns had created impressive projects showcasing their design skills, marketing creativity, and industry knowledge. When my turn came to present the Laurent Accessible concept, I felt the same nervous energy I'd experienced walking into Madison's wedding. But this time, instead of shame about not belonging, I felt proud of bringing a different perspective to the room. My presentation wasn't about pursuing traditional fashion success. It was about expanding the definition of success to include accessibility and sustainability. The applause that followed my presentation was genuine and enthusiastic. Sophia, my roommate who had become a close friend, whispered, "You just changed how everyone in this room thinks about luxury fashion." On my last day at Laurent Design Studios as an intern, Vivian asked me to join her for lunch at a small French bistro near the office. Over excellent wine and casual conversation, she shared more of her own story, the failures before the successes, the moments of doubt, the importance of maintaining creative integrity while building commercial viability. The fashion industry needs more people who understand that business success and artistic vision aren't mutually exclusive, she said as we prepared to leave. Your generation has the opportunity to rebuild this industry in a more sustainable and equitable way. As I walked back through the garment district one last time as an intern, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a struggling student whose biggest fashion decision was whether to spend $30 on a dress. Now I was returning to complete my degree with a clear career path and the resources to achieve goals I'd never dared to articulate. The $30 dress hung in my closet back home, carefully preserved as a reminder of the night everything changed. But more than that, it represented the lesson that had become my personal philosophy.
Trust your instincts, invest in quality over quantity, and never let other people's opinions determine your worth. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the courage to enter spaces where you're not sure you belong, wearing clothes that make you feel confident enough to discover who you're meant to become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the world notices your authentic choice and offers you the chance to help others make their own transformative discoveries. My fairy tale hadn't ended with the designer's hug or even the prestigious internship. It was just beginning, built on a foundation of hard work, calculated risks, and the understanding that real success comes from creating value for others while staying true to yourself. The girl in the $30 dress had become a woman with a mission, and that transformation was worth more than any designer label ever could be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.